Sandybridge E as a platform has been out for about a month now. And at the time, I kind of ran out of time and I couldn't do a video review of it. Plus, it's a CPU launch, and I was like, yeah, maybe that doesn't make a lot of sense. Anyways, I've got a brand new part here. It's a Sandybridge E part. It's unreleased. It won't be out till early next year. This is the Core i7-3820. It's this thing right here. It's priced at $285. It'll be the first and only affordable quad-core Sandybridge E part when it's released. And I had a little bit of extra time, so I figured why not do a little bit of a Sandybridge recap, talk about Ivy Bridge, and talk about this new Sandybridge E part in a video review for you guys. But first, let's start with a little bit of a history lesson. It all goes back to 2006. So prior to 2006, Intel used to introduce a brand new microprocessor architecture every 5 years. So we got the P6, 5 years later, we got NetBurst, which was the foundation for the Pentium 4. If things had continued to go down that trajectory, we would have gotten another microprocessor architecture 5 years later. AMD actually had a huge influence on Intel straying from that plan. This is why competition is good. AMD's K7, the K8, both of those processors back-to-back put a lot of pressure on Intel, especially within the enthusiast space, within the important Halo communities that kind of recommended what people should buy everywhere else. Not only that, but also in the kind of burgeoning AMD server market. Those architectures did very well, and Intel didn't really have a replacement to NetBurst on tap for another 5 years. That obviously changed. Some of the work that Intel had been doing out of the Israel Design Center, things that went into Pentium M, into Banias, into a lot of the notebook lines, that methodology and that architecture lineage got folded into the beginning of what Intel now calls TikTok. So TikTok was a simple departure from that 5-year cadence. And all it says is that every year you either get one or the other. You either get a brand new microprocessor architecture or you get the same microprocessor architecture on a smaller manufacturing process. This is actually a very, very simple design principle, which is that you either change architecture or you change process. You don't do both, because if you do both at the same time, you run the risk of, it's just a lot of risk, especially on an unproven architecture or an unproven process. Combining the two just generally isn't a good idea, particularly if you want to meet schedule. Obviously, with an unlimited time and limited resources, you'll be able to do it. But again, if you're trying to stick to a schedule, it's not a good idea. So you take that basic microprocessor design philosophy and extend it kind of everywhere. And what you get is TikTok. So every TOC, which is every 2 years, you get a brand new microprocessor architecture. And in between TOCs, you get TICs, which are basically the same microprocessor architecture, but on a new process technology. So 06 can be looked at as the first TOC in Intel's new strategy. At the time, it was codenamed Conroe and Merom, and users saw these parts as the Core 2 Duo, and eventually the Core 2 Quad later on. But these were dual core parts. The Core 2 Duo, very successful, very good. It put Intel back on the performance map. The follow-up was Penryn, so that was the first TIC in the series. So Penryn, you were looking at around 2007, 45 nanometer shrink. Conroe and Merom were 65 nanometers. You got a little more cache, a couple new features, but basically the same architecture on a smaller manufacturing process. Keep thermals in check, great for notebooks. Even end users on the desktop, they saw a lot of success with Penryn. Go to 2008, the end of 2008, you got Nehalem. Nehalem was the first TOC after this strategy had been implemented. So Nehalem integrated the memory controller on die, tweaked a couple of things with the architecture, but remained on the 45 nanometer process, same as Penryn. Nehalem stuck around for a while. 2009 saw some more mainstream derivatives of Nehalem show up. It wasn't until 2010 that Nehalem was replaced with a TIC. This was a 32 nanometer TIC. We got, the entire family was called Westmere. We got Arendelle and Clarkdale for the kind of entry-level desktop and notebooks. And then we got Gulftown for the high-end 6-core spiritual replacements to the original Nehalem processors. That takes us through 2010, bringing us to 2011, which is time for the third TOC in Intel's cadence thus far, and that's Sandybridge. That's this little guy right here. So Sandybridge was a complete, it's supposed to be, again, a new microprocessor architecture. It was a complete replumbing of everything that had kind of been maintained from Conroe through Nehalem. We got the introduction of a ring bus, much lower latency L3 cache, the first on-die GPU, a real effort from Intel, still not quite discrete class, but setting the pace for future Intel architectures to actually take graphics performance seriously and actually start integrating decent GPUs onto these CPUs. The other big feature, the killer feature for a lot of the client workloads, was something called QuickSync. It's an on-die video transcode engine, much faster than any of the other discrete GPUs could offer at the time, and much faster than a lot of the software x86 paths that were available. So QuickSync was the big killer feature for kind of the mainstream user. Even if you weren't using QuickSync, Sandybridge was great. It was very, very fast. In a lot of senses, Sandybridge did away with the kind of old two-platform strategy. So if you look back to Nehalem, there was Nehalem, which was a triple-channel memory controller. That's 3 64-bit memory channels. You had tons of I/O stemming off of the CPU itself. You could run two 16-lane PCI Express graphics cards off of the CPU itself, whereas with Sandybridge and a lot of its derivatives, so if you look at the mainstream derivative of Nehalem, if you look at Linfield, for example, Linfield only had 2 memory channels. It only had 16 PCIe lanes coming off of the CPU. For the vast majority of end users, even enthusiast users, that was enough. But a lot of people still stuck to Nehalem and that platform because of those advantages. Sandybridge was pretty much good enough top to bottom that you didn't really want any of the things that were missing from the original Nehalem. And effectively what happened was that old enthusiast desktop market just kind of got consumed by Sandybridge and this LGA 1155 platform. There is still this niche that does need tons of memory bandwidth, that does need tons of PCI Express bandwidth, and even more cores than you can get in mainstream desktops. That niche is shrinking over time, but these power desktop users or workstation users, they still exist, and there's room for Intel and other companies to sell millions of dollars worth of revenue into that space. But again, it is a shrinking market. To address that market, we have Sandybridge E, or Sandybridge Extreme. But the idea is that you have a different physical socket. So here is Sandybridge E versus Sandybridge. You can see that there's a physical size difference here. The extra pins, you're going from LGA 1155 pins on the socket versus LGA 2011, so 2011 pins on the socket. The extra I/O pads get you 4 DDR3 memory channels. So that's 4 times 64-bit memory channels, up from 2 in the original Sandybridge. You also get 40 PCIe 3.0 lanes versus 16 on the LGA 1155 Sandybridge. And those additional slots, or the additional PCIe lanes, let you do a couple of things. In addition to PCI 3, the combination of the two let you do a couple of things. One, if you are running a multi-GPU setup, now more than just one GPU can get full by 16 access to the CPU. Our tests have shown that this really doesn't do much for gamers, even if you're running 2 GPUs in SLI or Crossfire. It's not really going to buy you much, but if you're running 3 or 4 GPUs, the added PCIe lanes do come in handy. Furthermore, if you are maybe running a couple of GPUs as well as have a really, really high performance I/O card, say a PCIe SSD, now you can run all of that through the CPU, whereas in the past, you either have to move one through the PCH or start sacrificing in terms of bandwidth to one or more of those devices. PCIe 3 is also a supported feature of Sandybridge E. Of course, the LGA 1155 platform gets that with Ivy Bridge, but if you need that today, again, as we showed in our Radeon HD 7970 review, PCIe 3.0 really doesn't do much for gamers. It actually does nothing at all for gamers today. But if you're doing GPU, if you have a PCIe Gen 3 card, so today that's just the 7970, or next month when those things are actually available, it's a 7970. If you've got that plus a GPGPU workload, there are chances that you'll get a bit of a bump from PCIe 3. So those are the main advantages from that standpoint. Again, we also have tons of memory bandwidth, which again, that's a feature that most mainstream users, or even hardcore desktop users, enthusiast users, what have you, won't notice the difference between 4 and 2 memory channels. But if you've got the application, if you've got the workload that demands it, LGA 2011, the Sandybridge E platform will deliver it. The other big feature for Sandybridge E that's the delineation between 4 and 6 cores in the Sandybridge lineup. So LGA 1155 will only get you 4 cores. If you need more than 4 cores, which again, the majority of the desktop market doesn't need, but if you do, if you're running an offline 3D rendering workstation, if you are doing a lot of software development, these are all applications that can benefit from more than 4 cores and 8 threads. Sandybridge E is the only platform that you can really turn to within the Intel ecosystem. And there you've got 2 parts. There's the 3960X and the 3930K. Both are 6-core, 12-thread parts. They don't really scale beyond the performance you can get out of Sandybridge, the regular Sandybridge and the majority benchmarks. But again, if you've got these applications, those 2 parts do very, very well. The problem is they're priced fairly high, so are Sandybridge E motherboards. The 3930 will set you back $555, and the 3960X is a cool $1,000. So what happens if you need the platform advantages from LGA 2011, the platform advantages from Sandybridge E, additional PCI Express lanes, PCI 3.0, and quad-channel DDR3 memory controllers? What if you need those, but you don't need 6 cores in your CPU, or you're trying to save a little bit of money there? That's where the 3820 comes into play. It'll be released beginning of next year. It's going to retail for $285. That might sound cheap, but you have to keep in mind that, again, there is no on-die GPU, and the CPU doesn't come with a heatsink or fan in the box. So you have to add a minimum of another $20 on top of that, which kind of brings it on parity with the high-end Sandybridge pricing. The other thing is, you'll note that I called it a 3820, not a 3820X or K, which means this is a partially locked part, whereas the 3930 and 3960, you're free to overclock those things with at up to 57x multipliers. You don't really have to do anything else. Overclocking with the 3820 is a little more difficult, but thankfully, if you've got a good X79 board with some reasonable overclock profiles built in, if you set a 125 megahertz B clock, you can actually get some pretty decent performance out of this thing and overclock it to pretty decent levels without any real stressing, or without being limited by the fact that it's not a fully unlocked part. From the overclocking perspective, this chip, our sample from Intel, I was able to get 4.75 gigahertz out of it, which the chip might as well have been clock unlocked or multiplier unlocked to get that good of an overclock on it. So I don't believe the lack of a K or an X suffix is really a big deal. It just means there's one additional step when you're overclocking this thing. In terms of performance, it's very, very close in the vast majority of benchmarks to a Core i7 2600K or a 2700K. You do get a couple more megs of L3 cache, so this has got a 10 meg L3 versus 8 in those high-end Core i7 Sandybridge parts. And you do get higher overall base clock, so it's a 3.6 gigahertz base versus 3.5 or 3.4 in the other Sandybridge, the high-end Sandybridge parts. Max turbo is still capped at 3.9 gigahertz. But again, those things overall, you're looking at 0 to 8% increase in performance over the highest end Sandybridge. And to get that performance, you obviously have to go into a much more expensive motherboard, whereas you can get these $100 Sandybridge motherboards. Once you get into the Sandybridge E realm, you're looking at $200 plus. Now, the things you do get, again, is everything I outlined before. You get PCI Express 3.0, you get more PCIe lanes, you get more memory bandwidth. It's really a niche within a niche. If you need a high-end platform, Sandybridge E is there for you. If you need a high-end platform, but you don't need 6 cores, then the 3820 makes a lot of sense. If you don't fall within that niche, then it's pretty simple to make the recommendation. If you don't need the additional PCI Express and you don't need the additional memory bandwidth, then you're much better off with the base Sandybridge processor. You get a good platform, great performance. If you do need the extra performance, again, offline 3D rendering, software development, so on and so forth, there are always the 6 core parts as well. Looking forward, Ivy Bridge is just around the corner. Ivy Bridge will be backwards compatible with a lot of the LGA 1155 motherboards on the market today. From a performance standpoint, on the CPU side, you shouldn't expect much from Ivy Bridge. Basically, you're going to be the same performance as Sandybridge. What you do get are lower power consumption. TDP goes down from 95 watts for the high end down to 77 watts. This is a trend that you're going to see continuing in the future. The other major advantage is you get a upgraded GPU, so better integrated graphics performance. Still not quite discrete class, but definitely a march in the right direction, as well as better quick sync performance. So if you are doing a lot of quick sync video transcoding or plan on doing a lot of it, Ivy Bridge is supposed to bring some significant performance improvements there. As far as Sandybridge E is concerned, there is such a part as Ivy Bridge E that's going to be out, I would guess, early 2013. It's not on the roadmaps yet. And I would also guess, Intel hasn't committed to this, but I would also guess that it'll be a drop-in replacement to X79 motherboards with just a BIOS update, for example. And again, the main advantages there, I'm guessing, will be lower power consumption. At the same performance price point, or at the same clock speed, I wouldn't expect much of a performance increase. The next real performance increase will come with Haswell, which is, again, in a 2013 architecture, and that will likely require a new socket, new motherboards for everyone all around. But in a nutshell, that's what it is. If you are in the vast majority of the desktop buying population, what you want is a base Sandybridge. If you need more cores, more memory bandwidth, more PCI Express lanes, you need the ultimate in terms of desktop PC workhorse, there's Sandybridge E. The 3930K is likely the best buy there. If you find yourself in between both categories where you don't need an integrated GPU, you're not going to use QuickSync, and you don't really have applications that are going to scale beyond 4 cores, but you really do need more PCIe lanes or more memory bandwidth, there's the 3820, and thankfully it's priced reasonably, as I said, at $285 when it's introduced early next year. Other than that, the most exciting stuff is probably going to happen in the notebook side. Once these things get released, Ivy Bridge is going to do really, really well in the notebook. That's where some of the power consumption advantages are really going to come into play. And then looking forward, I mentioned that Ivy Bridge on the desktop takes the performance mainstream TDP down from 95 watts down to 77 watts. That's an important trend, which will be echoed in notebooks come 2013 with Haswell, where we stop looking at 35, 45, 55 watt notebooks, and everything kind of slots into the 15 to 25 watt range. With that comes some more exciting form factors, while we still do get an increase in performance. So exciting times ahead, and there's definitely some interesting stuff that's happening in even smaller form factors and smaller TDPs, which we will be talking about early next year. Anyways, for a full review of the Core i7-3820, check out the site at anontech.com. Thanks.